Essentially the question is, you tell me all of the things about your medical history, your age, your blood pressure, your BMI, like all of these things that we could measure about you. And then I tell you, what's the probability you're going to get heart failure in the next 10 years? And you could be like, oh, why is that? How could I decrease my risk of heart failure? The black box model can't tell. It doesn't know at all why.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Aiken, and I manage career services for the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University. Welcome to MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. A PhD is well known as a multi-year commitment. So what happens when your advisor is recruited into a new role at a new university? Do you stay where you've been expecting to be for the next few years? Or do you move with them to the new opportunity? Spoiler alert. Today's guest, graduating PhD student Mike Van Ness, chose to move here when we hired as advisor Assistant Professor Madeline Udell from Cornell. We've also just hired Renwan Zhu, who is bringing two of her existing PhD students with her, which makes Mike's story, albeit still unusual, particularly pertinent right now. So I'm looking forward to talking with him about his cross-country move, as well as hearing more about his research and how it can be adapted to a range of different problems. So Mike, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Of course.
Let's get started with that overview of your pre-Stanford background.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a pretty small town called Clinton, Connecticut.
Okay.
And lived there for most of my pre-college life. Went to a pretty small public high school in Clinton. After that, I did my undergrad at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. Ended up really liking Lafayette because it was a small school, but with a strong kind of STEM and engineering focus, which was more aligned with my interests. I studied math and computer science there, which was really great. Doing math and computer science was a good way to balance those two interests and also foster my love for statistics and data science. I started to really think somewhat seriously about doing more education after undergrad, applied mostly to stats PhD programs. I went right from Lafayette into Cornell. I spent 2 years at Cornell in the stats department, and that was when I started working with Madeline Udell, who's been my advisor for my PhD. I ended up moving from Cornell to Stanford after 2 years at Cornell.
We poached Madeline, we hired Madeline. You're working already with her. She's your advisor. You're enjoying that work. And so you have that decision of, do I move with Madeline or do I stay at Cornell and find a new advisor or whatever? So what was going on at that point when you heard that Madeline had got the offer and had accepted it here? Yeah,
absolutely. So at that time, I started working with Madeline the summer of my first year. And so I had been working with Madeline for a little under one academic year. And I found out from her in about April of my second year that she was going to be moving from Cornell to Stanford. I didn't really expect it. And then, she kind of said that she would discuss with each of her students what would be best for them. I thought about it a little bit, and then we had somewhat of a discussion about it, and definitely wasn't sure at first. On the one hand, I had mentally prepared to spend 5 years at Cornell, at least 5 years, right? And all of a sudden realizing that I might be leaving in a month or two was pretty jarring to even conceptualize, I would say. But then it also made sense for a variety of reasons. For one, we had started to do research and had done some mostly methodological work, but we were both very interested in applications. And one of the things that Madeline told me that she thought about Stanford from her time being a PhD student here was that Stanford's a really great place to do applied collaborative work. And so that was one of her selling points in terms of trying to convince me to go with her. And then there was also the fact that I had been living with my partner, Trisha, in Ithaca, and she was working a job that was based out of the Bay Area, but working remotely in Ithaca. She was about at the time when she was going to have to move to the Bay Area for her work. And one of the funny things was Madeline was like, I think you would really like it at Stanford, whatever, but I know that you're in a relationship here. And I was like, actually, it so happened that would actually help in that regard. Eventually, it was a pretty clear choice, I think, to come. And so the only really deterrent was leaving behind my life at Cornell.
That's a big transition to make there. You're coming up on about 40% of the way through your PhD, moving to the other side of the country. We've got another couple of people that will be coming, making a similar transition.
Right.
So how was that transition, and what would be your advice for these other incoming students?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say overall, the transition for someone like me that was coming with an advisor, the research transition was seamless, I would say. We just continued doing the same work that we were doing. In terms of coursework, I had completed most of the coursework that I needed to complete at Cornell. I did end up leaving with a master's, actually. It was also pretty easy because the department was able to accept most of my coursework. And so I did end up taking some courses when I got here, but that was more out of desire than necessity. But definitely the most difficult part was socially, just because I had a nice cohort of people in my program at Cornell that I felt pretty close with, and that especially because it was during a COVID time, as things started to open up, we're spending more time together, and that was really nice. And so it was hard to step away from that. I knew a few people in the Bay Area, but not that many. Of course, I had Trisha, which was nice, so I wasn't moving alone. That summer before I started here, I moved and I did an internship in the Bay Area. And that summer, I think, was pretty, I don't know if I would say rough, but like a bit more like socially lonely than my time at Cornell, just because I had moved here and I was just doing this internship. So I hadn't really integrated into the Stanford ecosystem yet, but we were living on campus. And so we didn't really know anyone yet. Starting in the fall, things socially picked up as you would expect. And so when I came in, I was in a little bit of an interesting situation where I had done 2 years of my PhD, had an advisor, I knew what I was researching, but I didn't know anyone. And so I ended up taking this course that Lori Cottle basically teaches. I guess it's pretty much a required course for first years. When I came here, it was like, am I a first year? Am I a third year? It's not really clear. Me and Zach, the other student that came with Madeline, both ended up taking the course. It's more of like a seminar, I would almost say.
It's the introduction to all the research that's happening in the department.
Yeah, exactly. And because I knew what I was researching, the research part of it was like, it was interesting more than like practically useful, I would say. But it was also just good because it gave me an avenue to meet the proper first year students, some of which I'm still friends with. If I didn't have that, then I don't know if I would have belonged to any cohort. Whereas now I feel like I belong most to what's now the third year cohort. Yeah.
One of the beauties of that course that Lori teaches there is absolutely that. It gives this shared experience for all of the new PhD students in a way that they're not necessarily going to have otherwise to help build that feeling of community and cohort.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's then dive into your research and what you've been studying. What's been your research projects?
Absolutely. My coursework mostly, at least when I was at Cornell, was mostly in stats. It was somewhat more theoretical, but I've always been more interested in kind of the applied side of stats. And Madeline has also been interested in this, but she's more comes from the kind of optimization landscape of it. And so our overlap was in our interest for applied work. And actually, the project that I started working on with Madeline when I first started working with her was related to the role of missing values, actually, in machine learning in general. And that was, in fact, what our first paper was on. But then once I moved here, Madeline and I started working in collaboration with this cardiologist who works at Stanford Medical. His name's Alex Sandhu. And he is a practicing cardiologist, but also is very active in research. And he was looking for someone to collaborate on a research grant proposal, actually, and wanted someone with more of an expert in the kind of data science side of things. He was referred to Madeline, and that really inspired our work, which was the kind of predominant application we worked on during my PhD, which was in heart failure prediction. And so we're working on this problem of, essentially the question is, you tell me all of the things about your medical history, your age, your blood pressure, your BMI, like all of these things that we could measure about you. And then I tell you, what's the probability you're going to get heart failure in the next 10 years?
Okay.
And so it's this somewhat of preventive looking lens of like, how can we better predict whether someone's going to get heart failure?
And the med school's got their whole precision health that they're working on. This sounds very tailored to an individual person.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a variety of ways that this would be done, but ultimately this is somewhat of a machine learning test, right? Like you take in a bunch of data You maybe establish a cohort of patients that you're interested in. You get this big data set. And then from that data set, you need to identify what features you think are most related to predicting heart failure risk. And then you actually need to build some kind of a model that can input those features and output the prediction.
Okay.
And so my research has focused on, I guess you could say, somewhat of a balance between the more interpretable side of these prediction models and the more kind of the state of the art, but black box side of these machine learning models. On the one hand, you have a lot of people in the medical community using things like linear models, which have been around for hundreds of years and are classical tools in this space, but aren't as accurate as the cutting edge deep learning research that's going on all over Stanford. We've thought a lot about like, why is this kind of more advanced deep learning research not being used as much for something like heart failure prediction in practice? And one of the reasons you could argue is that these deep learning models can't explain at all how they're actually coming up with the prediction. So I could tell you your risk of developing heart failure in the next 10 years is 20%. That's your probability, right? And you could be like, oh, why is that the case? What am I doing wrong? Like, how could I decrease my risk of heart failure? The black box model can't tell you. It doesn't know at all why. It's very good at actually making the estimate, but then it would rely maybe on like clinical expertise or something like that to be able to identify the reason for that. What we've been working on is developing interpretable machine learning models. And these are models that on the one hand would be able to predict risk better than something like a linear model, but then it's more interpretable. It can give you somewhat of an explanation for what's causing a higher or lower prediction compared to the deep learning research that is also tackling this problem. So that's mostly what I've worked on in the last 3 years or so. And we've tackled it both from a methodological standpoint, and we've developed some new models for this that we think are pretty good, and then also from an applied standpoint. And so we've tested these models on data from the Stanford Hospital, and we've also even tested on data from the Veterans Affairs as well.
That's amazing. I mean, this is super fascinating. It sounds like it's the sort of thing that could be broadly applicable to a whole bunch of things, diabetes and other forms of different forms of cancer, maybe, or other health issues too. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. On the methodological side of things, most of what we've worked on is interpretable machine learning models for something called survival analysis. And so survival analysis is at a very high level, it's like predicting someone's risk of something happening in a given time. So for the heart failure, it's like you could say, I want to predict your risk in the next 10 years. With survival analysis, you develop the machinery so that you can predict it at any time in the future.
Okay.
So you could give me what's my risk in the next 5, 10, and any of those time frames, and then the model will output that risk. And so it's a particular class of statistical models that have been around for quite a while. That's where we've done most of our methodological innovation, is specifically on interpretable models for survival analysis. But our methodology can be applied very broadly. Any problem that can be modeled with survival analysis, so mortality prediction, time until developing a disease, anything like that, or even outside of healthcare, people use it for time until a machine fails, machine failure prediction, or customer churn problems. How long is it until a customer will stop using our product? Any of these type of problems. One of the other great things about the research is that it allowed me to lean more into this desire for doing application. I think really quickly in my PhD, I realized that doing theoretical work was just not my forte. I really wanted to get my hands on something that I could feel tangible application to. And doing this kind of interpretable survival analysis, all this stuff, it's great from a methodological standpoint, but more importantly, the fact that we've been able to do this working so closely with a cardiologist and working with the Stanford data itself has been, I think, really rewarding.
Yeah. So that's the perfect segue then into kind of what's next from here. This applicability seems really a key passion of yours.
Sure.
So what are you going to be doing next?
Yeah, I'm going to be starting working at Uber as a machine learning engineer in September, and I'm going to be working out of the Sunnyvale office. So I'll be close by. And my journey at Uber, I've done 2 internships there now, weirdly in 2 different locations. So I interned first in the San Francisco office 2 summers ago, and then last summer I interned at the New York office. And I've been just bouncing around different teams. I've ended up kind of landing on this team that does incentive predictions, and they do some really interesting machine learning, causal inference, optimization kind of things. And then the machine learning engineer role will be nice because I'm not really looking to do academic style research, I would say, once I finish the PhD, because I really want to, do stuff that's really applied and mostly focused on that. And so as an ML engineer, I'll be doing some programming and then more machine learning methodological type of things. And hopefully it will be a good balance of that.
Yeah. And then is there something that you see yourself doing long term? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think going into tech is a good direction for me as of now. I think that there's a lot of really good opportunities in tech, but there's also just a lot of opportunities in tech. And so finding the right niche that you like in tech can be hard. It's kind of crazy. I'm going to be like 28 soon, and I haven't worked like a non-terminal job like ever. And I think really just going into that is the thing that I want to do the most, is put myself into something that's like full time and then just see what happens, right? And then the other thing that I'm thinking about maybe doing at some point is I've always been really passionate about teaching. I'm teaching this course at Stanford this quarter and leaving the door open for myself to maybe continue exploring more opportunities in teaching at the collegiate level at some point down the road.
Yeah, because you took over the 125 class, which our regular listeners will remember potentially. That was the class that Josh Grossman, who was one of our guests last year, had been teaching before he left.
Yeah. I was an assistant for the course for 2 years, and then because I have this passion for teaching and I thought maybe teaching would be something that I would want to do down the road, I decided that it would be really great if I could have that opportunity to teach the course like Josh had. Very fortunately for me, the department in Madeline was willing to accommodate this. And for people who don't know the course, it's the department's main intro statistics course. And we cover quite a wide range of material. So we do cover what I would argue could be up to 2 to 3 courses worth of material kind of jam-packed into one course, because this is often the only statistics course that these students end up taking. Because of my passion for application, it's really great in that sense because it is an applied statistics course. We talk a lot about examples throughout the course. We use real data sets. The students do a project where they work with real world data. It's a really great class. It's been great teaching it.
Yeah. I love that here at Stanford and within the department, there's just so many different directions that people can go into.
Sure, absolutely.
There really is like that place for everybody, and people can live their dreams and aim for their dreams.
Right.
Seeing the impact of our work, it's one of the reasons that I love my job so much. Just so great hearing you talk about that and seeing your enthusiasm as you're talking about the applicability of the work that you've been doing and what you're going to be doing going forward too. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to segue now into the final 3 questions that I asked everybody.
Okay.
You had a little bit of advice earlier for that specific set of students who were coming in as a transfer with an advisor who's moving in as well, but general advice for someone doing a PhD, something that they might not have already heard from somewhere else.
I guess this is probably advice that a lot of people have heard. The PhD is like a marathon, not a sprint. And that's probably is the biggest advice I would give. Is took a while to really get used to like how to actually go about doing research and how to go about actually like writing papers and stuff like that, because there are just a lot of people that are doing machine learning research these days. And if you want to publish in the top machine learning journals, it's very competitive and you have to know the right process that can lead you to that kind of end goal. And so I would say don't worry too much. If it takes time, people have somewhat high expectations from themselves, maybe in terms of, I should be publishing right away. No, it's okay. Like you have a long time. PhD is usually at least 5 years, and you just have to like keep with the process, keep asking yourself, am I doing the right things? Am I doing things that people think will be valuable? All of these type of questions. And then eventually things get better.
Trust
I would say, trust the process overall.
And then the second question is your life maxim, that signature phrase of yours that everybody hears you say all the time.
My senior quote in my high school yearbook was, "It is what it is," which is something that I somewhat believe. Kind of like what I was saying, there's just a lot of bad things that happen during a PhD. Your papers get rejected all the time. You come up with an idea only to find out that someone else has already done it. Like all of these kind of things happen so frequently, and you just have to get over it. And you have to be able to be like, no, it's okay. Like things will be better, and not dwell too much on the failures.
That resiliency to just pick yourself up.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big transitions going from undergrad to a PhD is being a lot more independent. And that's not only in terms of just like your life, but also like the way that you think about things in general. You have to be so much more like self-resilient. In undergrad, it's a lot of, you get spoon-fed problem sets and you have to solve them, but they're very like contained problems. And conversely, you get to the PhD and everything's so open-ended. And so you have to be like disciplined in terms of getting through that open-endedness and knowing how to like sort through all of that, I think.
Yeah. So, cut through the noise.
Yeah.
And then the final one is a book that is very MS&E related, another book that's completely free choice, and then a media selection of some sort that's free choice.
Yeah. The first is this book called The Book of Joy, which is, I'm blanking on the author's name, but it was basically a journalist who went and spent time with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu.
Someone just recommended this to me like a week ago.
That's funny. Yeah. So basically the premise is Desmond Tutu takes a trip to the Dalai Lama and they have a little retreat, essentially, you could say. And the journalist like just sits in on the entire retreat and takes notes. And then the book is digging into their conversations in detail, and then the journalist's kind of interpretation of their conversations. But the topic really is about like, how do you make happiness in life? And it's such a fundamental topic. It's one of those books, like it's on my bookshelf. It was given to me from my parents. And I just read like a chapter at a time. And it's really nice to be able to just pick up from time to time and just read little bits here and there. And I feel like I can get something from it because it's so topical and it's just really interesting. And then the second is Trevor Noah's autobiography. It's called Born a Crime.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was just very interesting to read. There's some comedic elements, of course, because it's Trevor Noah, but also just so insightful about what it's like to grow up in South Africa. Really digs into like the racial kind of struggles of being mixed race in South Africa. And I think that it's so impactful, I guess, and elegant how he's able to incorporate humor when talking about topics that are just difficult to talk about. You know what I mean? He made these really difficult topics really approachable because of how he was able to incorporate humor into the writing.
I've had that on my TBR pile for a while. I feel like I need to bump up that purchase.
So there's your 2 books. And then podcasts, the one that I'll go to is Trisha and my go-to podcast on road trips, which is this podcast called Criminal. And it is mainly this one journalist, her name's Phoebe Judge. It's like a true crime podcast, but it's very different than normal true crime podcasts, I think, because it's like journalist style, but they do really deep dives into these topics. Some of them are like things that happened last year. Some of them are things from like the 1800s. And then they'll find people to interview. If it's recent stuff, they'll interview like the actual people. If it's older stuff, it's usually like historians. But just a huge range of stories that come up in that podcast. And it's not all just serial killers. It's basically any story that involves some element of crime. It's really great just to keep you engaged on road trips, which is why we end up often listening to this together. So
podcasts and audiobooks are great for on road trips. This has been so much fun, mate. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
With everybody, I always look forward to kind of seeing where their careers take them, of course, from my career services perspective. But please do keep in touch with it.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. This episode was produced and edited by me, Lindsay Aiken, with editing support and post-production from Jim Fabry. Our music was composed and performed by Catherine Barron, MS&E Masters Class of 2023. Please be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify or whichever platform you're listening on, and check out our website at msne.stanford.edu. That's msande.stanford.edu. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.